Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Accreditation Unlocked, the podcast where we explore the strategies, challenges, and opportunities behind institutional effectiveness and accreditation. I'm your host, Dr. Ken Clough, and today we're going to take a deep dive into one of the most important but often misunderstood areas of organizational leadership: strategic management. Now, if you've worked in higher education, K-12 schools, healthcare, nonprofits, or even the corporate world, you've no doubt heard about strategic planning. Institutions put a lot of energy into it. Committees meet, consultants are brought in, surveys are sent to stakeholders, and after months of work, out comes a polished plan, often bound in a glossy report or posted on the website. But here's the catch. Not all strategic planning is created equal. Some organizations simply react to challenges without really changing anything. Others make adaptive shifts to keep up with trends. Some take a deeper approach, constantly asking whether their mission and vision are still relevant. And a few, very few, actually rise above the cycle of reaction and adaptation to reshape the environment around them. That is where today's conversation comes in. We're going to talk about 5 different types of strategic management: linear, adaptive, interpretive, expressive, and transcendent. These aren't just abstract categories. They're part of a continuum that helps us understand how organizations think, act, and evolve in response to their environments. So whether you're a college administrator preparing for an accreditation self-study, a nonprofit leader trying to strengthen your organization's impact, or someone interested in how strategy works in practice, today's episode will give you a framework to understand where your organization stands, and maybe where it needs to go next. All right, let's get started by laying out a little history behind this typology of strategic management. The foundation of strategic management typology. Strategic management as a discipline has been evolving for decades. Back in the 1980s, scholars began to notice that organizations weren't all approaching planning the same way. Ellen Chaffee, in 1984, introduced 3 models: linear, adaptive, and interpretive. This was groundbreaking because it moved us beyond the idea that there's just one right way to plan. A few years later, in 1987, Cope added another model, the expressive type, which blends elements of adaptive and interpretive approaches. This captured the fact that some organizations don't just adapt or interpret, but they integrate those processes into a more holistic strategy. Fast forward to the early 2000s, when I began synthesizing these models in my own work. In 2001, I developed a continuum of 4 strategic management types. And then, in 2013, after working with a wide variety of organizations, I refined this continuum by adding a 5th and final type, the transcendent model. This type reflects organizations that don't just respond or interpret their environments, they actually reshape them. So, from Chaffee's 3 models to Cope's 4th, to the addition of the 5th transcendent model, we now have a typology that gives leaders and stakeholders a way to better understand their organization's approach to strategy. Why does this matter for accreditation and organizational effectiveness? Because accreditation bodies often look for evidence that institutions are not just reacting to problems, but are engaging in thoughtful, intentional, and sustainable planning processes. Understanding these 5 types helps institutions assess not just what they're doing, but how they're doing it, and whether that approach is aligned with their mission and environment. Now let's walk through each of the 5 types, starting with the most basic. Linear strategic management. Linear strategic management is the simplest form. Think of it as planning with blinders on. Here, an organization looks at the environment, identifies problems or opportunities, and then chooses the best available course of action. It's a rational, almost mechanical process. Identify the problem, evaluate options, pick one, and implement it. Straightforward. There's nothing inherently wrong with this approach. In fact, for some organizations, particularly smaller ones or those in stable environments, linear planning can be perfectly adequate. If revenues decline, they launch a sales initiative. If enrollment drops, they increase marketing. If a piece of equipment breaks down, they replace it. These are all rational responses. But there's a limitation. Linear planning rarely produces substantive change. It tends to address symptoms rather than root causes. If your product is no longer relevant, a new sales campaign won't solve the problem. If student enrollment is declining because your academic programs don't align with workforce needs, more advertising isn't going to fix that. For accreditation, institutions relying solely on linear strategies may appear to be planning, but evaluators will notice that these efforts don't result in meaningful improvement. Accreditation is not just about solving problems as they come up. It's about anticipating change, aligning with mission, and demonstrating long-term effectiveness. So, linear planning can keep you afloat, but it rarely moves the organization forward. To move up the continuum, we need to take a look at the next type. Adaptive strategic management. Adaptive strategic management is the approach most people think of when they hear strategic planning. Here, the organization actively scans its internal and external environments, looking for both threats and opportunities. The focus is on adjusting strategies to fit changing circumstances. In higher education, for example, an adaptive institution might notice a demographic shift leading to fewer high school graduates in their region. Instead of just doubling down on marketing to the shrinking pool, they adapt by developing new adult education programs, online learning options, or partnerships with community colleges. This is a more sophisticated approach than linear planning because it requires environmental scanning, data analysis, and intentional adjustment. It's proactive rather than reactive. Accreditation bodies love to see adaptive planning because it shows that institutions are not just keeping their heads down, but looking outward and preparing for the future. However, the adaptive model is still largely about products and services. It's about what the organization does, not necessarily about why it does it. That's where the interpretive model comes in. Interpretive strategic management. The interpretive model shifts the focus inward, asking, what do we stand for? What is our mission? And how do we need to evolve in light of changing circumstances? Unlike the adaptive model, which emphasizes adjusting programs and services, the interpretive model is about aligning the organization's very purpose with the environment. It's about sense-making. For example, a nonprofit might realize its original mission, say providing food assistance, is no longer sufficient to address community needs. The organization then reframes its mission around broader issues of food security, nutrition education, and advocacy. This isn't just a change in programming, it's a change in how the organization understands itself. Interpretive planning is more complex because it requires broad participation and deep communication among stakeholders. It's not enough for leaders to make decisions at the top. The entire organization needs to engage in dialogue about the mission, vision, and values. In the context of accreditation, interpretive planning aligns beautifully with institutional self-studies. Accreditation isn't just about proving compliance. It's about asking hard questions about mission relevance, institutional identity, and long-term direction. Institutions that engage in interpretive planning are better positioned to demonstrate mission-driven decision-making. But of course, organizations don't operate in silos. They can't just adapt products or reinterpret mission. They often need to do both. That brings us to the expressive model. Expressive strategic management. Expressive strategic management is where things really come together. It combines the adaptive model's outward focus with the interpretive model's inward focus. In other words, the organization is constantly scanning its environment and simultaneously clarifying and communicating its mission and vision. This integration requires a high degree of coordination. Leaders, staff, faculty, students, and stakeholders, everyone has to be aligned, not just in what they do, but in the why they do it. Expressive organizations don't just adapt programs or rewrite mission statements. They build a culture where mission and adaptation inform each other. For instance, a university operating at the expressive level might recognize the rise of online education as an environmental trend. But instead of simply launching online programs to keep up, it asks, how does online learning align with our mission of serving first-generation students, or our commitment to community engagement? The result is not just more online classes, but online classes designed specifically to advance the institution's mission. Accreditation teams often see expressive planning as the gold standard. It shows an institution that is not only responsive, but also deeply mission-driven, with planning processes integrated across all levels of the organization. But what about the rare organizations that go even further, that don't just adapt or reinterpret their environment, but actually reshape it? That's where the transcendent model comes in. Transcendent strategic management. The transcendent model is the most advanced form of strategic management. Here, organizations rise above the environmental constraints and actually begin to define the environment itself. These are organizations that have mastered adaptive and interpretive strategies over time. They've been expressive for years, and their culture of alignment and adaptability is so strong that their actions start influencing the environment around them. Think of pioneering universities that redefined how online learning is done, not just for themselves, but for the entire sector. Or nonprofits whose advocacy work reshapes public policy and community expectations. Or businesses like Apple, whose product innovations don't just meet customer needs, but create entirely new markets. Transcendent organizations are rare, but they demonstrate what's possible when strategic management moves beyond survival and even beyond mission alignment to truly visionary action. For accreditation, transcendent organizations often set the benchmarks rather than just meeting them. They shape what quality looks like, influencing peers and even accreditors themselves. Moving along the continuum. So, what does this continuum of 5 types tell us? First, it reminds us that no organization is permanently fixed in one type. Institutions can move up and down the continuum depending on leadership, resources, external pressures, and internal cultures. A university might operate expressively during times of stability, but fall back into linear strategies when budgets are tight. A nonprofit might strive for transcendence, but find itself slipping into adaptive mode during a crisis. Second, it highlights that effectiveness is not just about having a plan, it's about the type of planning you engage in. 2 organizations can both achieve their stated goals, but the one using expressive or transcendent strategies will likely have a far greater impact than the one using linear strategies. Finally, it gives us a diagnostic tool. By asking, where are we on this continuum? Are we simply reacting? Are we adapting? Are we questioning our mission? Are we integrating adaptation with mission alignment? Or are we truly shaping our environment? leaders can better understand their strategic position and chart a path forward. As we wrap up today's episode, let's return to the central point. Strategic management is not one size fits all. Organizations can engage in planning in many different ways, but the type of strategic management they choose, or default to, will determine their effectiveness. The 5 types, linear, adaptive, interpretive, expressive, and transcendent, represent a continuum from basic problem solving to visionary transformation. Most organizations will spend most of their time somewhere between adaptive and expressive. Very few will reach transcendence, and that's okay. What matters is that organizations are aware of their approach and are intentional about moving towards greater alignment, integration, and impact. For those of you working on accreditation, this typology is especially useful. Accreditors don't just want to see that you have a plan. They want to see that your planning is mission-driven, responsive, and effective. Understanding where your institution falls on this continuum can help you strengthen your planning processes, improve institutional effectiveness, and ultimately demonstrate compliance and quality improvement. So, as you head back to your institutions, boards, or teams, I encourage you to ask, what type of strategic management are we practicing, and what type should we be striving for? Thanks again for joining me on this journey through strategic management. I hope this framework gives you both insight and inspiration for your own work in leadership and accreditation. I'm Dr. Ken Clough, and this has been Accreditation Unlocked. Until next time, keep planning strategically, keep aligning your mission, and keep unlocking your institution's potential.